Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation, Crafting Connection, How Storytelling and Communication Build Resilient Organizations. My name is Catherine Henderson, and I'm Interim President and CEO at YW Boston. I want to welcome back those of you who are part of our network and have perhaps joined us in our work or for past webinars, and also welcome those of you who are joining us and getting to know YW Boston for the first time. YW Boston is part of YWCA USA, and we all share the same mission: eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. This morning's webinar is part of our series, Thriving Together. We've been exploring different ways to build psychological safety and resilience through an equity lens. Today, we're excited to focus on the role of communication. In our work with partners and our own development as an organization, we've observed how often communications across an org or between two people can derail efforts to build a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture. I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator today, Cristela Guerra. Cristela is Senior Arts and Culture Reporter for WBUR, a queer Panamanian journalist of color, and a moderator who facilitates and leads conversations around race, identity, and equity. Cristela.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I think both as a storyteller, as a journalist, and as someone who understands how important it is for us to find ways to connect and to talk about difficult things, especially in the moments that we're living through globally. And I think that that's the macrocosm of what we see reflected in the microcosm in the workplace with our families. And so for those who are here at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, I highly admire you, and I'm glad that you're going to join us. And I hope you participate and add questions in the chat to really engage. I want this to be an engaging, immersive conversation. It is also my pleasure to introduce our panelist. So first we have, and forgive me, Dr. Anouska Battacharyya, who uses she and they pronouns, Vice President of Programs at YW Boston. Welcome, Dr. Anouska. David Brown, who uses he and him pronouns, Vice President of Communications and Development at Vinfen. Welcome. And Austyn Mayfield, she and her pronouns, Creative Director at KOS Creative Media. I'm so overjoyed to be here with all of you today. And I guess I'd ask you first, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling really grateful and excited. I remember when I first got the ping to see if I was available. I was like, absolutely, I will move anything I need to move. I'll do some filming later today, but right now I'm here and I'm really excited to be having this conversation.
Ditto. I was so delighted to be on a panel with these wonderful folks and actually to be interviewed by you, Cristela. I've been a big fan for a long time, and I just think that this topic is so important at this moment in time. So I'm feeling good. I'm feeling calm. The sun is shining. I'm grateful for the good weather outside.
And thank you so much. I'm feeling honored anytime that I can step forward, step up, and be part of something that YW Boston presents. I am all in. So excited to have a conversation on communication, and I'm also excited to hear from all of you.
So I think we have a ton of really good questions. I think a lot of you also emailed questions to us, and so I will try and kind of get to both. But I think we should begin around how you use storytelling day to day. So how do you use it to build connection with colleagues who have different lived experiences? And I think tips specifically for CEOs and executive directors, of which I'm sure we have quite a few. Anyone can begin, and we can kind of make it open popcorn style. Or I can pick. Austyn, do you want to start?
I'm happy to go first as a leader at the organization. I think my connection's unstable. Go ahead, Austyn. I'll catch up.
Oh, no. I think I'll start with, because that felt like 3 questions. So I'll start with, how do I use storytelling day to day? And I'm going to do personal first. I think for me, and I think for honestly all of us, storytelling is actually how we're coded into engagement. So I think one of the ways that I use storytelling is as I'm engaging with someone to start asking the questions. I have a journalist background, and so this is like I'm building a story. It's a narrative now, so it's not just hi person who, I just happened to bump into at Starbucks. This is like, no, I need a backstory. Like, what's your motivation here today? And for me, it just helps, it helps elevate the engagement when it's almost an opportunity for discovery. And I guess that's also, in terms of what makes storytelling powerful and as a tool, thinking of it as a connection space, I think has been really powerful for me.
Thank you so much.
I would add to that I see it as data. And I think as a leader, you need to be fluent in all the data that's available to you, both in being able to bring in more constituents and stakeholders to the work that you're doing, in terms of coaching and developing others, in being able to communicate pivots and shifts that are going to affect a number of different parts of your community and your network. And so I really think it behooves leaders to become more fluent at the craft of storytelling, not only so that they can speak to their own data, but so that they can really speak to and synergize the data that the folks who work for them and the folks that they're providing services to are really sort of effectively communicated to those that need to hear.
And my name is David Brown. Thank you all for being part of today. For those who may be visually impaired and are blind, I am an older gentleman. I am wearing a bow tie. I have no hair and a gray beard. And I'm so helpful. I'm so glad that all of you are here with us for today. I like the fact that you brought up data. I like to say scientists love data and people love stories. So how can we effectively tell the story that is not only personal to you, but important to your organization? And storytellers need to have active listeners. And so one of the great tools that the Lead Boston program did for me with YW was really leaning into how to be an active listener and accept and hear stories that are told from an authentic, from a personal, and from a deeply, at times, challenged point of view.
Well, and I mean, what it sounds like, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like authenticity. It sounds like a sense of sort of curiosity, and maybe a bit of wonder. I wonder, this is sort of off the beaten path a bit, but what was the expectation of leaders before? And why is this so novel? I'm curious, just this comes up for me. Why is this so different than what was happening prior in these environments?
I'll jump in. I work at an organization that has 3,200 employees spread out across the Merrimack Valley, down and through Eastern Massachusetts to the Cape and the Island. Vinfen has over 500 programs. So communicating statewide across an organization that ranges from clinical social workers to direct care workers, ranges from new immigrants to folks that have been established in the Eastern Massachusetts community for decades and beyond. Prior to our new leadership, communication was up and down, cascading conversations from senior leaders to directors of support, eventually getting to those who are actually doing the work on the ground. That has to change. It's changing, and we're taking a much more active role in communicating from middle to down, middle up, being much more thoughtful about the way that internal communication is managed and is planned out. It's very difficult, but well worth the effort.
And I'll just sort of add, my mind immediately went to a broader historical lens. I think for decades, the workplace was a place you go, you do, you leave, right? And I mean, to a very, like, you do specifically this if you're on a line, right? There wasn't, the workplace has changed. And I think social expectations and rights of workers have changed, right? And so how do you move in becoming more human-centric as the workplace becomes more human-centric? Because now people have choice. I can leave your organization. I can go find a new one. I can start my own, right? And so what are the ways, as you mentioned, David, up, down, around communication are drivers in the marketplace? And I think what we see in terms of these conversations and leaders being interested in storytelling and the power of it is actually a response to what the market demands, what employees demand, and what leads to success for organizations.
Speaking of research, unless Anouska, do you want to add anything, or should I?
No, I'm loving the conversation. There's plenty for us to get into.
Fantastic. So I have something here from Amy Edmondson, who's a leading researcher on psychological safety. And she defines that as a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated with ideas, concerns, questions, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So how can organizations leverage the power of storytelling to build psychological safety? I think to translate that, I'm hearing it, how do you make a team?
I'm happy to start. I mean, sort of piggybacking off what was just described earlier, the workforce is different than it has been. It's more diverse, it's more multi-generational than it's ever been. And so when I first joined the workforce, some 20 years ago, everyone was expected to look the same and behave the same. To Austyn's point, you went to work, you did what you need to do, and then you bounced. And now this is a place where folks forge real connections. The folks that I've been able to work with across the pandemic, especially, are folks that I've been able to craft real friendships with. And so for us to go into the workplace and ignore the humanity that is there, to discount our own humanity, actually means we won't be able to be as innovative as a team. We won't be able to be as productive as a team. And I think as a leader, for me, it starts by modeling that I'm going to be vulnerable with you. I'm going to be transparent with you. And I can do that through authentic storytelling of my own story and creating space for you to share the parts of your story that you want to tell me. It is not for me to craft a story about you. It is for you to share with me what you need me to know so that we can work together efficiently and effectively.
And Anouska, I'm so glad you brought that up. My organization is in the disability space. And so not only are we listening and crafting stories about employees, but we have 10,000 individuals served who are living with disability, whether it is mental health conditions, intellectual or developmental disabilities, and having a story that is person-centered, that is centered around a person's experience, but more importantly, giving space so individuals served can tell their own story, earn their story, and more importantly, decide whether they want to tell their story. So often in the disability space, folks who are currently able-bodied feel like they have the divine right to tell other people's stories. That is no longer the case. So whether it's in development, communication, or just the fact of hearing stories, individuals with disabilities own their stories in a unique way and have the ability to be able to, or should have the ability to be able to tell their own story.
Austyn, anything to add?
No, keep going. Keep going. This is good.
Well, it's funny because I'm looking at the questions from folks that they emailed in advance, and they're not just along the lines of what we're discussing, but they're very straightforward. How to deliver inspiration, and then how to set an example without it coming across as a lecture. So there's this real feeling of engaging with people that are different, but then beyond that, having them feel in the environment that they feel motivated to do not just above and beyond, but they feel inspired to do more.
Can I answer that question with a question to you, Cristela, and the panel. So in preparation for this, I was sharing with a friend that, oh, we're going to talk about storytelling and, how it brings people together. And she started to say, yeah, but I'm not as good at storytelling as you are. And I was like, wait, hold on. And then that took us down a path of, can we separate here for people and for ourselves the difference between storytelling and oration and rhetorical skill? Because I think sometimes when I hear people talk about it, and I'm like, no, you're a great storyteller. And they're like, no. I'm like, no, you. And so I want to sort of flush that out a little bit, because those, to me, they're very different things: oration, rhetorical uses, and storytelling, which to me is a little bit more innate. But I'll stop because that's my question.
I love that, because I was thinking about that too. I think of storytelling as introspection, as an opportunity for me to first spend some time with myself and think about what I want to share versus doing like a public speaking class. And I think those are both valuable skills that people can choose to develop, but they aren't the same thing. You can give a great TED Talk and be absolutely rubbish at storytelling because you haven't really spent that time with yourself. And I will say that, as a woman of color, it took me a long time to realize that I even had a story to tell. I wasn't aware that my lived experience was necessarily valuable or represented or welcome in the workplace. So I could do a lot of storytelling with my friends, but when it came to the professional space, I felt like I had to flatten that. And it took a bit of work to connect the dots that actually my ability to tell my story was itself inspiring to other people who felt like they shared identities with me. And it created a new baseline for communication within the workplace, that we weren't just going to be business as usual, but you could say, hey, I'm kind of having a tough day today. I'm going to need X, Y, or Z to be able to get through the day. You don't have to tell me your entire story, right? Not every meeting needs to start with a full-on therapy session, but you've spent enough time with yourself and I've spent enough time with myself to know what we need to communicate and how we need to meet in the middle so that we can do what we both said we wanted to do. So I love that you're really sort of pulling those threads apart, Austyn. I think that's a great point to be making at this point.
And, jumping in on that, when I do think of storytelling, I think of the Moth Radio Hour, right? So not even amateur storytellers appearing on stage, telling a 5-minute story in front of an audience. Some of the best stories I've heard in that context are not from, quote, professional storytellers. It's somebody that knows their lived experience. They understand the stakes that are involved in their lived experience and willing to be vulnerable in front of other people. And vulnerability doesn't mean sharing everything about yourself. It's owning that one little kernel of information or one little kernel of truth that you want to pull back the curtain on and share with others at any given time, at any given place, and in any given manner.
And David, I love that you just said, pull the curtain back, because I was thinking about windows as well. And some of us, sometimes with storytelling, we have an opportunity to sort of clean our windows, right? We're there, we can see through them. But again, that transparency, right? What are we actually allowing in, allowing out? And I think really great stories, they're clarifying, right? You can see into them, you can experience them away. So I love the window analogy there.
And as a leader, go ahead, Anouska.
Well, thanks, David. So the sort of circling back to that initial ask of like, how do I do it? I like to say, start with I statements. A lot of us were trained to speak in generalizations, and this can be really flattening of others, but of ourselves as well. But start with I statements. I think, I feel, I know, I don't know, I'm interested in, right? Rather than we, because that does create a bit of distance rather than getting to that vulnerable, authentic kernel that David was reminding us of.
David, feel free if you want to finish your thought.
I just was going to say, as a leader in nonprofit work, I try to do it by modeling. and giving space to those that I work with to follow suit, whether they choose to or not at any given moment. And in particular, having candid conversations with the CEO of the organization, with other senior leaders about the need to give others space at every level of an organization.
It's so interesting because in Austyn, you know this, like I'm coming from a field that asks the question every day, what is a story? And then the idea of the hierarchy that forms when you dictate narratives for communities versus allowing the communities to tell you what they feel their stories are. And then that is what's on the front page. That's what's on air that morning. That is in theory the priority of the neighborhood. Those are the things that we care about most. And what all of this is bringing to mind, and I think it does often because I feel like we're still processing communal grief. But during the pandemic, if you were on a Zoom for work and you were having a bad day where someone was sick, I think there was a time and sort of people had to learn to say, look, it's not a good day for me. How do I bring in the fact that I'm struggling, that someone is struggling, that we discuss the conflict of the moment, which is actually a big question among the questions that were emailed in. How do we discuss the conflict that is obviously happening, this elephant in the room maybe that we're all experiencing, whether globally because of a pandemic or because there's an internal conflict that we must navigate together, but someone's afraid to like touch that nerve. There is almost this fear of discussing it. I am someone that will call out that thing. It is not always welcome. I don't always do it right. But I'm wondering how you all handle situations like that.
Well, and I think that goes back to, we sort of touched on psychological safety a little bit, but to go deeper into that, it's very easy for individuals and organizations to say, no, bring me your story. I want to hear it. But I have lived for multiple decades in a Black female body, and I can tell you that has not always been the case. In fact, there have been very specific cases where someone said that, I did that, and then there was fallout, right? And so I think when we talk, going back to David's point around authenticity and leadership, and what does it mean to model those things, if you ask for someone's story, you have to take care of it, or you will never get it again. And you will miss out on who, first and foremost, who that person is. You'll miss out on their innovation, their contribution, and you will either lose an employee or you'll have this weight, and these things expand, right? It's not just happening with one person. It's not just happening with one demographic or phenotype. If you are not a safe space, and you have to learn what that is, and people will tell you what that is, but if you're not doing that, then all of this will be seen for performative, and you're going to lose trust, and then you're going to lose relationships.
Others?
I'll always talk, you know me. To Austin's point, I do think it is something that is earned, right? This trust, this opportunity to hear people's stories. And I think it's also okay as a leader to say, this is the time that we're going to be sharing stories, and this is the time that, for whatever reason, we have to focus on X, Y, or Z. And that can be an unpopular thing to say. And you may still have Cristelas in the team who are gonna, you know, hold you accountable for those stories. And we appreciate you for doing that work, Cristela. But I think it's also okay to say, this is a space that we're creating for more sharing and more sort of exchange of these stories. And if we're all about to get on a bus to get out of a space really quickly, like maybe we won't have a 10-minute story from everyone as we're getting on the bus, because we've got places to be. And so depending on the work that you've got going on, there may be different spaces that you as a leader have to intentionally craft. I'm not going to ask all of my new employees to share their stories in our all-staff meeting on a Monday, but I will have a one-on-one with them throughout the week and see what stories they want to tell me and model the stories that I want to tell them. So I think there's also an opportunity for leaders to actively and intentionally craft spaces for the different kinds of stories that folks want to tell, rather than sort of holding up their hands and saying, ooh, it seems like everyone has lots to talk about right now, but we're not going to create any spaces for that. We're just going to move along business as usual.
Someone in the chat put, I appreciate the use of performative. I've encountered people at my job who present as wanting to do the work and hear the stories, but can't accept the story being told. David?
Well, so when Austyn was speaking, as somebody who perceives himself to be white, there have been historical times and still today in which if Austyn were to share her story, it might, quote, make somebody who perceives himself to be white feel bad. And so that's performative. And we need to make sure that as somebody who perceives himself to be white in an organization that has a wide range of employees and individuals served, that there is space for people to feel, but also space for people to heal. And I often think that we don't allow that to happen. Because if I expect somebody to share a story, I have to be prepared for what that story is going to say and how that story will land on not only me, but also others, and to give space for whatever needs to happen as a result of that shared story.
To accompany that, there's a really good question that just asks for sort of action items. What would be a way to start a story in the first couple of sentences to grab attention and the listener and the reader? This is, I'm assuming, not something sensitive that would sort of require a bit more like vulnerability and trust. I think this is maybe more the opener to get people to try some kind of storytelling. Is there a thought that you all have?
You know, I have a couple of employees who are in their early 20s. And so their only lived experience as a, quote, adult in the working world is in a Zoom environment. And so when you step into an office, I am sure I've given space for my employees to really talk about the experience that the pandemic had on their formative year of senior in college to early working environment, and how that has shaped who they are as an employee and as a person. So I want to hear that story, because that will determine how we navigate the next year to several years of their working life. And as I say to them, I say, I want this to be the best in-person job that you've ever had, or at least have ever started. So how can we make that possible together?
I started my work career in a higher education space as an academic. And so I'm very aware of the ways in which positionality and power can make folks feel like they're on the spot. And so if I'm trying to engage in a sort of storytelling fashion with someone else, as the person who might be asking that person a question, there's automatically a dynamic where I have demanded of someone else. So in lieu of starting a story with like, tell me what I want to know, right? There I am, the Socratic method, asking you a question, you're on the spot. I like to start with, here's something that I've been thinking about, and I'm really curious your thoughts about this thing. And that gives that person a chance to put on their active listening hat. It gives them a chance to see where you're going, and you're sharing with them. You're automatically sharing something that you're curious about, you're wondering about. And so the storytelling goes from being, I demand this of you, I need your attention, to a dialogue. And for me, really, storytelling is an invitation to real dialogue between two people who are genuinely engaging in communication with each other. To start with, here's something I've been thinking about.
Austyn, would you like to follow up?
No, I'm just reveling in this idea of storytelling as invitation. And I never really thought about that, tell me a time. I was like, oh my gosh, that is an imperative. I just demanded that of you. What if you don't want that? And, and trying to think about this from a leadership setting, if there is something I would like to get out of the specific storytelling, well, I was just sitting here thinking, how would I invite? And I think, again, directness. Hey, I'm wondering, have you noticed anything, or I'm curious about your experience with policy A or project B, right? You know, are you seeing any ways we can, right? Or just asking about the experience within a specific space, not from a, you know, do you have a slide deck? Do you have, like, no, how are you moving through this space? And what can I glean as a leader or a manager from hearing about your experience? Because we may be able to find out, you know, this vendor is really responsive, but the production time, you know, because I was just talking to Sal, and again, now we're in a story and I'm hearing about what happened with you and Sal, but I'm still getting, as Anouska said, data that helps me understand what's happening and how it's impacting my team.
There's a lot of questions about DEI that were emailed in, and they're coming up in the Q&A actively. So there's actually 3, but they're similar. So feel free to answer any of them. But essentially, what is the role of storytelling in DEI change processes? What skills do people already have that they can leverage in that? And then what are potholes? Because I think definitely in the realm of DEI, potholes sort of, they come up, but it's because you're discussing, I think, things that make people either uncomfortable or who maybe they've never thought of. And then that makes them uncomfortable because then they wonder if they should have thought about this stuff.
I mean, my hot take is that DEI has often been weaponized to silence folks rather than this invitation of sharing, connection, authenticity. I tell everyone in our programs, you are already an expert in yourself. And so when it comes to DEI, storytelling, you actually already have the data that you need to begin speaking about yourself. This is not an opportunity for you to describe other people's experiences, but to talk about yourself. And so if that is in the moment, I'm feeling shame or uncomfortable because of my identity, even naming that gives you a little bit more power, and it brings the other person in, as opposed to saying, you make me feel bad because I have this particular identity. So in terms of things that folks can already have, again, I always say, do a little bit of introspection because you are already the expert on yourself. And the whole purpose of DEI is for us to come together and to find opportunities to hold hands despite and through difference, rather than to push folks away into silos where we end up in these sort of lumps of pointing fingers when no one, it's that Spider-Man meme, no one is actually in charge of the action and everyone is waiting for someone else to take action. So that is where I would begin.
And I think it's so important to add belonging to that, because if there's not a sense of belonging or an invitation to belong, then I think everything else is a moot point. And so I try to encourage not only the notion of belonging, but a true sense of just by you being here, you belong, and making space for that as that's non-negotiable. The idea that you all belong just because.
And to add sort of to that thinking as well, when I was thinking about a pothole in DEI, but I think in organizational effectiveness and employee engagement in general, a big pothole for me has often been the language of institutions being the focus instead of the language of the people. And so any room I'm in, if I'm looking at a document, if I see utilize, not optimize is okay, utilize, leverage, like unless I'm talking about an actual spoon, I'm not trying to leverage another human being. I'm not trying to, you know, utilize another human being. Those things, you can't utilize someone and liberate them, right? So I can't do that at the same time. Now I can optimize. And one of the things that my brain has been tumbling around the last few weeks is like human-centered optimization. Like humans want to do work. We want to be productive. We want to connect. And we want to do it well, right? How do we do that? And I think those things can exist, but human-centered leveraging, no, because that's me using you. I can't utilize you and connect with you. Those are two different parts of my humanity.
I think a lot of that depends on the language. and being intentional about the language, speaking about, particularly person first language. And, in the disability space, realizing how important it is for person first language and how perhaps it might feel clumsy out of the gate, but it's such an invitation when you center your language on individuals, on people, rather than on a disability or a appearance or something that is non-negotiable in somebody's lived experience.
And I want to say that with any change process, there are going to be potholes, things that people fall into. The expectation is not that folks are going to be perfect. If you're expecting yourself, your team to be perfect, then you've already failed coming out of the gate. There are going to be times where inadvertently, or maybe vertently, that's not the word, but either way, someone's going to slip up. And I actually think there's a lot of beauty and productive energy that is created when you repair together. If there's never been any sort of friction at all, sometimes I wonder, have we really gotten to know each other? Have we gotten to the real issue? Are we really changing anything? So I also encourage folks not to be afraid of the potholes, not to let that be the barrier for you trying to do some storytelling as a leader, for you trying to create this change in your organization, trying to pivot into a new, more sort of human-centered space. There will be mistakes, and there is real strength in your collective story by repairing together or asking each other, what do we do now that allows you to feel really good and celebrate the changes that you've made.
And I just want to add to that, if you are a leader and you are in the space of helping someone else repair, share your own pothole story, right? Because that is, instead of me saying, okay, Anouska, like I know, let me tell you how you just stepped in it. It's let me tell you about a time when I too found myself, again, you don't have to say the exact same things that got you in trouble the first time, because that'll open up a whole new can of worms, but being able to share we're going to respond to this, but I want you to know I see and I've been there too, right? And so it's not this hierarchical, even though within a, hierarchy, but make the mistake human and then work on fixing it.
And I think part of the challenge at times in an organization is realizing the platform that you're communicating on. I've gone into more potholes thanks to email, thanks to Teams, rather than actually making sure that I'm communicating one-on-one, stepping out of the box space that we are at times living in and stepping into a more of a human space.
I
just want to say sometimes emails feel very unsafe. And so like, I would much rather wait until we're both on site at the same time and then pop into your office. Again, I'm working on that, but it's true. Like the email space, because we're all carrying things with us, and how you wrote your email might be very different from how I'm reading your email. And, it's like, well, he used a comma there instead of ending the sentence. And that means whenever David does that, he's mad. Again, I've started storytelling to our own demise, right? And so, yes, be very aware of the platform. I agree.
I had a mentor who said, if you're starting to write an email and you need more than 3 sentences, just pick up the phone or schedule a call instead, because it's likely that one of you is going to trip over something else, and then you're in that email whirlwind, and no one gets out of that without a few dings.
Can I just say I have such an appreciation for the vulnerability of this panel, and the fact that this is usually the stuff that you talk about offsite, after work, over coffee or dinner, when you're venting or discussing the ways that either the conversation went bad or maybe it went well. But often the reason that workplaces need the venting off site is because that's maybe the time where you actually either code switch or just naturally feel the ability to talk openly. And so for people to ask of this level of vulnerability inside the workplace is actually quite the revolutionary thing, because it requires not just safe space, it requires brave space if you're going to confront conflict. And I mean, I think as a journalist who's talked to people both on the best and the worst day of their life, You know, if I'm asking someone to speak to me and they just lost a child, if I'm asking someone to speak to me and they're literally in the midst of grief, I probably have shared this story. I've shared this story many times, but when I'm mentoring young journalists and I tell them, if you're sent to a car accident and the ambulance hasn't shown up yet because you got there first, if you're on site behind the caution tape and the person is talking to you about someone they literally just lost, they are not going to remember what they told you the next day. So what is the power dynamic that you play as a storyteller in community reporting on difficult moments, which we must, it's our duty, it's the accountability aspect of what we do. And simultaneously, what are the ethics and the standards behind that guide your relationship with every single person that you meet at any given moment? How do you actually heal a community if that community believes that you only show up on their worst day? How do you build trust in a community? Well, you go to their events that make them happy and you participate not from a transactional place of getting the story. You show up because the stories matter, whether or not it's front page news, whether or not it's a big scoop. The stories matter because you actually care about them as human beings. And that is directly applied, I think, to the way that we engage in an office. Also, I am a giant dork. And someone in the chat said, in quote, need space for people to feel and space for people to heal. Yes, makes me think of Star Trek Next Generation. Great show. Had it right. Every org needs a counselor and a Deanna Troy to hold this and help people through their feeling and healing journey. Oh, glorious. We're getting into that kind of the weeds of that. And if you guys all want to, someone asked, can you talk about how to ensure that the invitation to tell your story isn't transactional? And then same question, what are ways to respectfully request stories from reluctant and shy colleagues and clients?
If someone once told me, and I cared, like, again, as a journalist, as a leader, when I sit down with people who are, you know, I'm interviewing, especially on camera, they're always like, oh, I'm sorry, like, I don't know if you can use this. I'm like, oh, that's not your job. My job is to get a good interview, right? That does not land on you. So to the question on how do you get someone who's reluctant, reflect on how you're entering the space. If you're entering the space from, I need to get this story, step out, try again. Because again, that reluctance comes from a space of, is it safe? What is happening here? But when someone understands what's happening here is human connection, they will share with you, right? There is no there's not a hack. You have to be authentic. You just have to, right? Or you'll get the reluctant story and it might be part of the story and you can use it in a social post. But like, if you want the storytelling to be there, you have to come in authentically. I don't remember what the first part was, Cristela, but that one landed with me.
No, totally that. I mean, I think everyone's sort of asking about collective repair and starting. So it almost feels like it's the arc. It's the beginning of asking. And then when it goes bad, which it will, because this is something we're learning, how did you observe like really successful collective repair? Or how do you wish it could have gone differently?
Again, I come back to sort of positionality and power, and this like really tracks with what Austyn was sharing, that it is on me to make the effort, and I have to be aware that my efforts may be rebuffed depending on the relationship I have or what's happened. So if it's a new relationship in terms of trust, and I show up and I'm like, give me the scoop, right? I might not get that if I haven't established some trust. I can give that person a heads up as well. Hey, I really want to sit down and chat with you. You're a new employee, you're a new member of the team. I'm looking to get to know you. Let me know if this is a good time to chat. Be ready to share my own story as well. Even though these things should not be transactional, you need to appreciate the value of the story that you're trying to get someone to share with you. If there has been some damage, that person may not want to meet with you. And so I have to go back to my portfolio, my repertoire of what can I try? What is the strategy that I can employ? I can also just be direct and say, hey, it looks like you don't want to chat to me. And I'm wondering what I can do or what would make it easier for you to have a conversation with me. Maybe they want to have a friend, a buddy, a colleague in the room with them. Maybe they actually do prefer email. Maybe they are, they have some social introversion. Maybe they're just going to say it's going to take time. And so having a deadline for the story, I think, is not going to be conducive to getting it, because ultimately this is about being relational rather than being extractive.
And I think we have to realize that there's the story, but there's also a backstory.
Yeah.
And being aware of trauma-informed experiences and how people come into any environment with a full lived experience. And I don't deserve to hear that yet. I need to establish trust and rapport and kindness and vulnerability on myself. But if there are real lived experiences that might interfere with an initial storytelling, that's okay.
I've been looking at this question for a minute. I'm happy I can finally ask it. This is from someone who says, being a street outreach worker and working for a network of neighbors, how do you validate, understand, or react to a few fake stories? So I'm thinking that there is a story that may be told in a different way. So it's sort of a situation where maybe the person, it's not telling you the full story, or you're kind of wondering about the authenticity of that story, but you're also trying to help them maybe out of a bad spot.
First of all, thank you for your work. Being a individual who is gathering stories and working in vulnerable populations, that is hard work. So I acknowledge that I don't have an answer for that because that's not my lived experience. I would think, Cristela, when you talked about being a journalist in the environment, in the community, I was a member of the Channel 5 community for years. And the one icon in Boston who recently passed on is Sarah Ann Shaw, reporter at BZ. And she was a member of the community first and brought her community to work rather than taking herself from work and going into the community. So for this individual who is working in a vulnerable population as a street worker, I am sure he, she, or they are spending the necessary time to be part of the community, but it just takes time, I would think, time and trust.
And I also think it depends on depending on what the purpose of the story gathering might be. I think, if you're in that setting and, training in sort of like social work and interventions, perhaps understanding additional motivation and being able to work with the part of the story that is true, and it's like, okay, so we have some facts here. So okay, you mentioned that. Let me go back because this is the part I understand a little bit more. And, try to focus on don't focus on the part that you can't confirm or that makes you feel uneasy. Don't ignore that because, again, especially if you're in a service space, you need to, it's like, okay, interesting, that was said. I wonder, can I corroborate that or even better understand why that was said, especially if I know it not to be true? It's like, well, that was Sunday. It's like, we know it was Friday, but okay, there's a reason you're saying Sunday. Take a note, like don't focus on that, but like in the moment, but circle back, entering the story place, not necessarily from a place of, I'm not saying you're being judgmental, but like figure out what the need is as you're engaging with the story and try to meet the need. And then, come back, especially if the falsehood is perhaps connected to a harm that they could do to themselves or others.
Yeah, follow up. I mean, we have a youth program at YW Boston, and so it's slightly different, but middle schoolers, they may forget what they've said, or they may not have, the same memory of the event. And rather than, mentioning that they've changed the story, which can then further distance you with that child. It's an opportunity to continue to follow up and say, hey, you told me about this last week, can you remind me again? Can you tell me about, what that event was? And providing connections and resources. The other thing that we do a lot in our youth program is we're not just focusing on speaking, right? There are other ways to communicate. It's in how that kid is showing up that day, what their clothes look like that day, how they're drawing, how they're working with others in their peer group. And so thinking about stories as data, there's often a lot of data that is available to you that doesn't require someone to traumatize themselves in sharing that with you verbally.
I usually try and make sure that if I'm asking somebody to talk to me about something that potentially has the possibility of re-traumatizing, I think agency, willingness, and an understanding that it doesn't all have to happen at once. And I think David's point to return to is no one owes you their story. And so even as a journalist who gets paid to write people's stories, I immediately inform them, you don't have to speak to me. You can tell me to go away. I just have to ask. In the same way, I have to ask you how old you are. You don't have to tell me how old you are. You don't have to tell me anything. But the reason that it's useful is because this is what we're talking about. And for more people to tell this story shows that it's a true situation that the neighborhood is struggling through. Especially as an arts and culture reporter, I can tackle politics and immigration and every aspect, gender, LGBTQ issues, but I do it through a lens of art because it makes it more, it makes it softer. It offers an ability and a filter to let people understand things differently. We are wrapping up, which makes me really sad because I've enjoyed this so much. Do you have final thoughts?
I would say for me, I'm really glad that this session is called crafting, because for me, this is a skill that can be practiced. And so when it comes to storytelling, whether it's telling your own story, leading a storyteller, trying to encourage folks around you to tell their story, you don't have to start from a place of fluency. This is something that can be crafted over time, but you do need to start. And so for those who have attended the session feeling like, I don't know where to begin, there isn't really a wrong place to begin, but do begin, do start. This can be crafted in collaboration with the folks around you, and it's a skill.
I would add to that this is an opportunity to sort of hop into something that's already happening. The stories are happening in your organization, with your audiences, and the opportunity to then connect to the stories, be enriched by the stories, whether that be personally, but hopefully institutionally, organizationally, even broader, right? The stories are happening. And as leaders, to not be plugged into that means you're missing out on a huge part, not only of your employee experience, but if you care about people around you, the people around you are engaging with each other and you are being left out. And so I would encourage, humility, curiosity, and truly valuing the people in front of you, because the stories are happening. The question is, how connected are you to them?
And give people grace, realizing that we are all trying, or at least I'm trying my best. And I assume everybody is trying their best. And so to give people grace at any given time, on any given day, and realize that we are all, this sounds cliche, but we really are all in this together. And to your point, everybody comes with a story. It just depends on this particular day, in this particular moment. do I deserve to hear it?
I'm hearing a call for a part 2. A lot of people want a part 2 of this. I'm game. I think we'd just love to know what you all would like to hear from a part 2. We definitely have some questions that we can get into. I think affinity groups, talk of racial justice, discussions of, I think, specific realms of difficulty around discussing certain subjects. I mean, I'm up for it if you all are.
I'm in.
So
Absolutely.
Captain, my captain, I'm ready. Let's go.
The people demand it.
I'll hand it off to Catherine.
Thank you. I just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone who joined us today, and in particular, thank our panelists and moderator for generously taking your time and sharing your knowledge and expertise. It was really a wonderful conversation. I think someone put in the chat, the time flew by, and it really did. I can't believe we're at time. There were many great questions we weren't able to get to this morning, so please keep an eye out for an upcoming blog where we'll respond to some of those. Our DE&I consulting and training team is ready to support you anytime, so invite you to schedule a call to learn more. And want to remind you all, we are dependent upon the generosity of people like you to do this important work on our community, and hope you might consider supporting us. And finally, we're excited to be sharing a DE&I informed communications toolkit that you'll find in the chat box. And we can also follow up with that via email as well after the webinar today. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.